Now on this, we want to bring in CBS News political director Steve Chaggaris. All right, so Steve, maybe some people were surprised. It was so close to call, I think, yesterday that I know I put $1 one way, and it might not have worked out for me because I really didn't know.
How'd you do? Did you win?
I did not win. I did not win because honestly, I thought Roy Moore was going to eke out a win here, and he didn't. Take us through it. How did Doug Jones win?
Well, it was a confluence of things, mainly. The turnout for Jones was, I think, higher than I think anybody thought it was going to be.
Right.
Democratic turnout was higher. Places where Republicans normally turn out was lower. And you put that all together, and next thing you know, a state that normally votes in Republicans by wide margins did not vote Roy Moore in. Now, African-American voters turned out in higher numbers than I think people thought was going to happen. Democrats are very excited to see that. Generally, I think what you saw in this race was enthusiasm among Democratic voters and not so much about Republicans. Now, what that means going forward, a lot of people are going to want to read into this and say, oh, wow, this is a terrible sign for President Trump and for 2018. Let's also keep in mind, it's a terrible sign for Roy Moore. The guy was an extremely flawed candidate even before the allegations about sexual misconduct came out. You add that to the mix, and it's very clear that Republicans were not that enthusiastic about going out and voting for this guy.
So you think this is more about the candidate more so than the repudiation of the president, so to speak?
I think the specific results are yes. However, I do think there are many warning signs for Republicans moving forward, and I think Republicans are going to have to wake up and realize that in the races we've seen this year, special elections, the gubernatorial races in Virginia and New Jersey, Democrats and Democratic voters are much more enthusiastic about the elections this year, and they're going to probably carry that enthusiasm into next year. Republicans have not shown that enthusiasm. They've got to figure this out. Yeah. President Trump, Republicans in Congress, they need to figure out how to get Republican voters excited about what they're doing, enthusiastic about what they're doing, and get them out there next year, or else they could be in big trouble in the midterms.
Enthusiasm seems to be kind of one of the things that are lacking out there with the discourse, the civil discourse that exists. Let's talk about President Trump's tweet, though, last night. The congratulations to Moore was kind of a little thinly veiled. Congratulations, even though the write-ins did, have a bigger influence than they should that he talked about. But the Republican Party this morning, they're waking up and seeing these results. What is the general theme today?
A couple of things. One, look, Republicans from the get-go here, when Moore got the nomination, is no good outcome for them because Moore is a controversial character. Then the allegations came out. He had been out there saying, I'm going to campaign against Mitch McConnell. I'm not going to necessarily work with Senate Republicans if I win. So even more, if Moore won, it would have been great for Republicans. I think there are a lot of Republicans in Washington who are breathing a sigh of relief that Moore lost this. Yes, they lost one seat in their majority. They have a Democrat coming in taking a seat that's been held by a Republican for a very long time. But the drama surrounding Roy Moore is now gone. They don't have to worry about that. There's that. There's what happens moving forward. You had the Steve Bannon effect, right? Steve Bannon has been a thorn in the side of Washington establishment, Washington Republicans, Mitch McConnell. They're looking at this and they're saying this is a huge loss, a huge black mark on Steve Bannon and his politics. And yes, he is pro-Donald Trump, but he's also anti-establishment. And they're looking at this and saying to Steve Bannon, if you're going to fight against us, you better put up good candidates, because this was not a good candidate, and we lost a seat that should have been won by Republicans. So Bannon's influence moving forward is going to be really interesting to watch. This fight between the establishment Republicans and Steve Bannon is going to continue. I want to see how Republicans figure out how to take Donald Trump's message, which I still think has some resonance, especially among Republican voters, but marry that to candidates who can actually win and will support the Republican leadership. That's going to be interesting to see if they can do that.
Are you talking about Steve Bannon? He was on Breitbart Radio today and commented on the outcome of the race. Let's listen to that.
I mean, one thing you got to give a hat tip to, the DNC came in here, slipped in here underneath the radar, and did an amazing job of organizing, what's my favorite word, ground game.
Yes.
Right? Ground game. You got to give the devil its due. These guys, I tell people every day, there's no magic wand. You're going to have to outwork people. If you get outworked, you're going to lose. And I got to tell you, their ability to get out votes, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, the ground game was definitely a factor because his candidate disappeared for the last 2 weeks almost.
But in any other day, and any other candidate in Alabama, this is not a race. This is not a contest.
Yeah, right.
So, you can talk about the DNC ground game all you want, but it wouldn't have mattered if it weren't for Roy Moore. And Steve Bannon went all in with Roy Moore and almost actually won this thing, but it shouldn't have been this close. And again, I think what you're going to hear Republicans in Washington say is, listen, Steve Bannon, if you're going to do this, find candidates who aren't terrible
Well,
candidates.
that's the thing. Do you think anybody during this whole process was like, is this the best we've got? Is this the best that we could find in the state of Alabama?
But that's what you heard people say, and that's what you heard Richard Shelby, the Republican senator from Alabama, say. We can do better than this as Republicans than nominate people like Roy Moore. And the voters spoke. The voters of Alabama spoke, and I think that's going to resonate with many Republicans. The question is what is Bannon going to do moving forward? Is he still going to try to challenge incumbent Republicans because they're not 100% in lockstep with the president? And if that's the case, what is the alternative? Is the alternative somebody who can win in a general election and hold a seat that Republicans should hold?
Let me ask you this question. Do you think that the Republicans sort of dropped the ball long before, during the primary, because they backed Luther Strange, who might not have been the candidate that Alabama wanted, wasn't the candidate that Alabama, and they blocked out other competition?
I think we have to remember this is a very unique situation. I know we try to take every one of these elections and say, oh, well, here's the broader explanation for all of it. But keep in mind, Luther Strange was named to this seat by a governor who had his own scandal that he was dealing with. And so he was tied to that governor. I think there was, Luther Strange was looked at in the eyes of the Alabama voters, at least the Alabama Republicans, as somebody who in his own way was flawed. Again, tied to that Republican governor who had his own problems. So Strange had problems from the get-go. Moore snuck in there, riled up the base, won a runoff and became the nominee. It just was not a great setup for Republicans from the get-go. They probably could have found somebody, they probably could have set this up differently from the get-go.
Interesting to say the least. No wonder the entire nation was actually focused on this election of an Alabama senator last night. Steve, thank you very much. Thanks. Good to see you.